Hello and welcome. I'm Melinda Crane in Berlin. Could the chaos in eastern Congo become an all-out conflagration? That's just one of the topics on our agenda today. It's time to talk. It looked like history repeating itself as rebels overran resource-rich Goma in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Who's behind the M23 rebels? And what's fueling the latest fighting in a country that's weary of never-ending conflict? A world without AIDS? It sounds like wishful thinking, but the UN says it's feasible. A new report records major gains in preventing and treating HIV, with infection rates falling by 50% in many sub-Saharan African countries. Are we on the way to vanquishing HIV/AIDS, or could premature optimism lull us into false complacency? And stop the press. A string of high-profile closures has readers asking, is print passé? Both here in Germany and abroad, venerable newspapers and magazines are shutting down the presses. Can print survive, or have the new media consigned paper and ink to the dustbin of history? My first guest is Alexander Gerlach. He is the founder and editor-in-chief of the daily online magazine, The European. He has worked with many of Germany's most respected media, both online and print, and he has also reported for the television network ZDF. He knows media markets on both sides of the Atlantic. His journalistic work has taken him from New York to London and Rome. Mr. Gerlach, it seems rather counterintuitive, but the European has just now brought out a print edition. You seem to be rather bullish on the possibilities of print in the future.
Well, print is not dead per se. It's some stuff that is printed, and a daily news-driven newspaper is one of the models that may be vanishing over the next years. A printed Sunday paper, however, most probably not. So there is it's different models. Unprinted paper. The European now is a quarterly print. It costs €8. It's on top, in addition to what we have every day in English or German published online. So this is a model that still is because people still read on paper.
We want to hear more about those models and where they're heading in the future. I'd like to introduce our next guest. He is Thomas Kirsch. He's a doctor who has designed the AIDS battle plan for Germany's development assistance organization, GIZ. He spent many years in the field as a physician in Africa. Dr. Kirsch, the UN report actually uses the words getting to zero when it refers to HIV infection. It's hard to believe. Are you equally optimistic?
Let me say it's ambitious. It's very ambitious, this goal. But I think we really need ambitious goals to overcome HIV/AIDS, maybe in 10, in 20 years. So I would say, yes, it's possible if we continue with the same efforts or even double our efforts in the coming years.
Thank you. We'll be coming back to that also in just a moment. First, our third guest, Ilona Auer-Frege. She heads the Berlin-based Ecumenical Network Central Africa, which links NGOs that are working in Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Following the genocide in Rwanda, she served with Germany's DED Development Agency, helping found Rwanda's Civilian Peace Service. Ilona Auer-Frege, when you read these latest reports, sometimes you have to ask yourself, is it time to give up on the idea of a peaceful, united Congo?
No, certainly not. Of course, it is terribly disappointing to see that the same violent history is repeating itself again and again, but I think we have also made some efforts in the last years. We have also seen some positive results. If you perhaps see Rwanda, I think a lot of steps have been taken towards a brighter future. So I think we shouldn't give up hope, but we have to also strengthen the opportunities that are given, strengthen UN sanctions, strengthen international support to the region, but also strengthen local civil society to help themselves to overcome the conflict.
The fact is that the Democratic Republic of Congo actually should by rights be one of Africa's very richest countries, for it possesses vast mineral resources. Yet 2/3 of the population are living in extreme poverty. Rich deposits of copper, diamonds, and coltan have proven more curse than blessing, provoking repeated conflict that has taken 5 million lives over the past 15 years.
The conflict here has been simmering for years. The eastern regions of the Democratic Republic of Congo are rich in natural resources. Many countries, including, some say, Rwanda, are keen to get their hands on its diamonds, gold, copper, and other minerals. The leaders of the M23 rebels flew to the Ugandan capital Kampala on Monday for talks. Regional powers are trying to obtain a rebel pullout from the main eastern city of Goma. But it's now been a week since M23 took the city, and they say they aren't going anywhere. As always, it's the ordinary people that suffer. In the last weeks, thousands have fled amid reports of abductions and rape. Is this only the start of what many fear will develop into a wider conflict? Goma was quiet early in the week, but the fear of violence continues to hang over the city.
Ilona Alfredo, what are you hearing from members of your network? What is the situation at the moment there?
At the moment, the situation in Goma is rather calm. There has been a deadline asking the M23 rebels to leave the country by today, but they have refused to do so. But still, you have not seen any attacks from the National Army, FRDC. So at the moment, there is kind of a ceasefire situation, but we are waiting for what's going to happen in the next days.
But we do possibly have a major humanitarian disaster in the making, don't we? We have 120,000 people displaced already.
Yes, I mean, up to 120,000 people have been displaced in the recent weeks, which adds up to the 1.4 million people who are already IDPs in the country since many years. So this is, of course, a major humanitarian disaster, and it is also very difficult for our organizations, for our members, to reach those people on the ground and to offer them humanitarian assistance because they are dispersed in an area that is covered by dense woods. So it's really difficult to get reach to them. Also, it's not really known where rebel troops are, where National Army is deployed, so it's also difficult to get access there without endangering your own people.
And the fact is, the Congolese government seems to be dramatically incompetent at helping its own people. We're seeing reports now that areas that are governed, so to speak, by the M23 rebels actually work a lot better than most of the rest of Congo.
Well, that's perhaps a bit early to see because this rebellion has only enlarged itself in the last week, so it's not time yet to say if they work better than the National Army or the national troops. But what you can see is that the National Army is not only working dramatically badly, it's even worse. They are looting, they are raping, they are trying to use the best for themselves at the moment and making the situation in the end much worse than it used to be before.
Our report mentioned the regional powers calling upon M23 to pull back. On the other hand, aren't the regional powers, including Rwanda, the country that you know so well, more part of the problem than of the solution?
Is obvious. I mean, there have been several UN reports that indicate clearly that Rwanda has in the last years financed and also sent ammunition, has sent troops, has deployed their own staff in the Congo to wage this war that they are at the moment claiming not to know of. And of course, Rwanda, Uganda and also Burundi are big stakeholders in this conflict.
Tell us something more about that. What's driving their involvement?
Rwanda's involvement is now lasting for at least 20 years in the region. Since the genocide of 1994, Rwanda has claimed to go after some Rwandan rebels that were stationed in the forests of the Congo. But the real reason behind the involvement of Rwanda in the conflict is their interest in the natural resources, which means coltan, tin, copper, gold. Rwandan troops have been active in the region by taxing, building local mines. They are controlling the illegal export of those mineral resources on the world market. And this is the real reason why Rwanda and also Ugandan troops are active in the region now already for 20 years.
Personally speaking, is this a disappointment for you? You have worked in Rwanda. You helped set up a peace service there. So much aid money has been invested in Rwanda, trying to bring it back after the terrible events in that region. Is it personally sad for you to see this happening?
Well, personally sad for me is that the international community has been knowing what was going on with Rwanda in the Congo for a long time. It's not that news are coming up now which have not been known before. The point is that after the genocide, Rwanda has found a lot of international support because international donors felt somehow guilty for leaving Rwanda alone during the time of the genocide. And this has allowed the Rwandan government a lot of credit and a lot of quiet acceptance for their behavior in the Congo. So I'm terribly disappointed that our government, that the EU, but also the UN Security Council has accepted what was going on in the Congo. We are talking about 5 million victims of war in the last 10 years. For a long time.
But the fact is that international organizations and even NGOs have been among those who have lionized Rwanda's President Paul Kagame. He's still standing on stages with people like Bill Clinton at major international events.
Yes, that's true. We've been, as our organization is doing lobbying work for humanitarian causes in Central Africa. We have been pointing our finger on that fact already for at least 10 years at the moment, trying to say, yes, Paul Kagame has been helping to stop the genocide, but there is also the backside of the medal. He's also responsible for a lot of human rights violations in the Congo, and we must stop to ignore that fact, and we have to really work with Paul Kagame in a different way.
Have we done enough to pressure not only Paul Kagame, but also Kabila to finally start governing right in the Congo?
Well, that it is very difficult to pressure a government that legally, on a legal point of view, is a sovereign state. I mean, there have been elections, okay, it's clear that they have been flawed, but it is an elected government, it is a so-called democracy, so it's very difficult to treat this government in a way. You can sanction it to a certain extent, but if a government is completely refusing to do its job, what can you do? I mean, there is the biggest UN peacekeeping mission is already installed in the Congo, but they are also legally bound to the government. So if the government chooses to run away from rebels, to just give up and not act, also the UN peacekeeping troops are not entitled to act. So this is a very difficult situation. How can you pressure an elected government to get active?
And indeed, those peacekeeping troops have often stood by and essentially watched as the violence raged. I'd like to talk a bit more about what we can do in the West, and for that I'm going to bring in our other two guests and start out with a little poll. Who's got a mobile phone with him or her?
I do.
Yes.
Got a mobile phone? Should our first act be to throw those mobile phones away? Many of them are full of what we call conflict minerals. Alexander Gerlach?
Well, I would say I do really like my smartphone, and it helps me a lot during my daily life here. So we as consumers should be pressing these the companies who produce, be it in China or Africa, to have fair conditions for their workers.
You've spent some time yourself, Dr. Kirchvoig, in Africa. Would you say that for a country like Congo, resources are more of a curse than a blessing?
It depends, but in some of the African countries, really minerals which could contribute to wealth of a society, in many cases fuel conflicts and enrich a small part of society, and very often, yes, even contribute to civil war, to a lot of injustice in these societies. But it does not have to be like that. There are other examples, Botswana, for example, which really uses very well for development of a society, their minerals, but it's really an exception. And in many countries, I think, due to also governance problems, deficits in the area of control of government power, lack of civil society being involved, or parliaments, it's really, yes, frightening.
Ilona Auerfriege, what could civil society do about something like conflict minerals? Is there a lot more that all of us should be doing, for example, to make sure that companies don't procure minerals from war regions like Congo?
Well, the point is for me not so much to stop using Congolese raw materials, because this would end up in a boycott situation that hits the local population who produce the material even worse. The problem is more to put pressure on the Congolese government that they make sure that the production and the trade of those minerals is done in a proper way, and that the riches are going the profits are going not only in the pockets of a few mafia-like structures, but that the profits end up for the benefit of the local population. So I'm not asking for a boycott, but I'm asking for pressure on the government to do an efficient and benefiting process.
But Alexander Gerlach, frankly, aren't Western attempts to exert pressure increasingly ineffectual, given the fact that many African countries have a noble beneficiary in the form of China, which is absolutely willing to look the other way when it comes to all kinds of violations, human rights, war, and others?
We see clearly that in regard to these minerals, we speak about that all the countries on the planet are intertwined. The globalization has a very impact to each and every one of us. So, and if we look in particular, as I see it on China, we have two spheres of influence. It's China, as you said, and it's the Western nations. And we, however, have established over, let's say, the last 50 or 60 years, human rights standards. We have organizations in place who control that human rights are not only issued, but also fulfilled and carried out. And so I think there is a specific need for us in the West to be careful what China is doing, because as far as I see that from reading and talking to people, is that they are more about exploiting these countries and finding workforce. And I guess, and I'm happy that we in the West have established other standards.
Dr. Kirschvoigt, Germany is one of the countries that had sent peacekeepers to various regions in conflict. Would you want to see German troops go back to a place like Congo?
Good question. I was thinking about that coming here, because I have a son who's working for the German army at the moment. And it's really a difficult decision for politicians, I think, if you should send troops. I think one hand it is, of course, it can be very helpful to reduce civil war and problems we have in Congo. And maybe it can be a solution, but I don't know if I want to see my son going there. So I have to say, frankly, that I'm a little bit divided in what should be done.
One piece of good news has emerged from Congo in recent years, and that's the fact that the rate of HIV infection there is falling. Countries are keeping their commitments, quote unquote. Those are words you don't often read in a UN report, but there they are in black and white in the latest edition of UN AIDS Global Report, which also mentions that statistic on the Congo. Just one of the achievements that the report records, a major reduction in HIV infection among children, making the vision of an AIDS-free generation not just possible, but imminent, according to the UN. Good news for all as we mark World AIDS Day this weekend.
AIDS, a scourge that has killed millions in the last 3 decades, especially in Africa and other parts of the developing world. Doctors and researchers have made slow but steady progress in the fight against the HIV virus. A vaccine still eludes them, but new methods of treatment have helped lower mortality rates and combat prejudice. A recent report published by the United Nations has given fresh hope. It says new HIV infections and AIDS-related deaths are declining. The rate of fresh infections, it says, has fallen worldwide by around 800,000 in the last decade, down 20% on 2001. The number of deaths that are linked to the disease has also dropped dramatically, by around a quarter between 2005 and 2011. Prevention and treatment. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? How close are we to finally halting AIDS?
Thomas Kish, you have been working in this field for 20 years. 20 years ago, when you started, would you have thought we would be at this point today?
No, never, because there was no treatment available here in Europe, in America, but also, of course, in developing countries. And only within the last 10 years, treatment is largely available here in Europe. and since maybe 5-7 years also in developing countries. So that is really enormous progress for millions of people who are now can continue to live and are not forced to die because of AIDS. So it's really, really a big success.
What is the key to that success? What has brought it about?
I think there are many factors. It's international commitment, it's domestic commitment, it's civil society engaging for people living with HIV all over the world. And so, let's say 10 years ago, there were very few resources available for treatment, for prevention programs, and that really has increased a lot. So there are resources, and more there's also a commitment by governments, by small organizations, communities in developing countries trying to fight against HIV/AIDS, prevention, treatment, care of people living with HIV.
But the fact is the world does continue to underspend on prevention. Experts say that spending to stop mother-child transmission, for example, ought to triple if we want to meet those targets that the UN AIDS organization has set out.
I think that's a very valid point. Treatment is one part of the coin, and it's a success story, but it has to be maintained. On the other hand, we neglected, from my personal view, over the last years, the area of prevention. And prevention is much more difficult than just giving a pill and bringing people in a treatment program. So it's about sexuality, it's about stigma, it's about gender, about so many different topics in society that it makes it quite more complex to be successful in the area of prevention. But for example, in our programs of GIZ, which are mainly commissioned by the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, we focus absolutely on prevention and also integration in systems, social security systems, health systems, because we are convinced that HIV programs should not stand alone. It's really important that they are integrated in broader service approaches for the people living with HIV.
But clearly the success in that area is rather patchy. If you look at the statistics on knowledge, then it's shocking that many, many young people, and especially young women in developing countries, particularly in Africa, still don't know about the link between sexuality and HIV. How can that be? Are organizations like GIZ not working enough with the schools, or what's going wrong there?
I think we are working with schools. We are working with youth outside the school. We are working with health services, with ministries, with NGOs. But as I already tried to explain, it's a very tricky issue and topic in society. Do you want young boys and girls to know about sexual prevention? And there is not consensus in many countries if we should talk about that, or better not to talk about that. So it's just to give you an idea that to be successful in prevention is a long-term effort, which needs really also enabling factors, enabling environment in society, with political leaders, with church leaders, with civil society coming in and making it possible to talk about sex, talking about HIV, talking about drugs. It's not so easy.
I want to come back to that point, but whatever happened to the idea of a vaccine? We used to hear all the time, it's just around the corner, just a couple of more years, then we're going to have that vaccine. Can we really talk about getting to zero without a vaccine?
Yes, yes, to be open, I think a vaccine would help a lot, of course. But still, if we would have a vaccine, all the question of bringing it to the people, bringing it in the rural areas of Africa where you need it is still unsolved. So you need enormous efforts to be successful. On the other hand, where is no magic bullet to overcome this disease. And I think we have to be careful not to focus only on this approach of looking for scientific results and overlooking what are other contributing factors, poverty, not enough, or let's say no access to education, no access to health services. In many countries, these are the real problems and make it so easy also to be infected.
One of those factors, of course, also war, Ilona Auer-Frege. Mass rape has been a weapon in the Congo and clearly presents a huge danger of HIV infection.
That's true. We have seen in the last years a big increase in the counted numbers. I'm talking about counted numbers of rape in the DR Congo, especially in the war-affected areas. But we also see that rape is not only used anymore as a weapon of war, as a systematic means to intimidate the local population, but it has also spilled over in the behavior patterns in families, in societies. That means also rape as a part of domestic violence has increased a lot in the last years. And this is also, of course, linked then to HIV and AIDS. So we see that war also has effects that in the beginning you don't even think about, but it happens. It brutalizes a whole society.
Alexander Gerlach, when we talk about misinformation or lack of education on sexuality and its link to HIV, are the media also partly responsible here? Have they perhaps not done enough to get that information to the people who really need to have it?
What Thomas pointed out was really interesting because he said it's not only about medicine, it's about information by political leaders, by church leaders and all that. I remember when the year before the euro was introduced, I did a long travel through Italy, and in every parish, on the announcement boards, the parish said, this is how your new coins look like, and this is how the new euro looks like. And obviously, talking about a moral matter is something different than talking about the currency. So officials, like church officials in Africa, would not speak about HIV as a pandemia, but as a moral issue. And it's, on the other hand, it's the Pope said once, you cannot, I say it frankly, you cannot solve the problem with spreading condoms or just giving. It's also education. So you have not one single solution in that regard, because there's traditions in these countries and the value of family and all this together. You can't just come in and say, hey, here's some, change your behavior and do this and that.
Ilona Auer-Frege, you of course work with church groups. Have Catholic church groups sometimes proved an obstacle here?
Well, this is a cliche, of course, but if you look at what the Catholic Church does also in African rural areas, I think they are often the only structure that even exists on the ground, and they are the only structure that provides basic health care, basic education. So of course, there are cliches about the Catholic Church, but without the structures of the Church, I think even less access to the local population would be given. So I think we should even take the resources that are given and use them in a most effective way.
Thomas Kirsch, how optimistic are you looking toward the future? The UN report is very optimistic. In doing the research for this program, I saw some commentators in South Africa saying, watch out. If we are too optimistic and too positive too soon, we may wind up lulling ourselves into false complacency and giving up on the vigilance we need to have. Do you see a risk there?
Yes, I would agree to your statement, or to this South African author. It is, there are successes, I try to explain that, but so far it's really an unfinished agenda. There's still so much to do. There are so many challenges. Long-term financing of people who need treatment. It's for the whole life you need this treatment. We need this international commitment. We also need the commitment of national governments in developing countries to contribute to this fight. It's not only one part can do it. And I think we really have to do more in the area of prevention, because if you want to come to zero infections, of course, treatment reduces the retransmission rate. So for concordant couples, one positive, one negative, it is great because you are not anymore infectious because you are treated, or nearly not infectious. But still, we saw it's 2.5 million new infections per year. It's too much. We will never get to zero if we continue like that. We really have to make big efforts. And my fear is that other topics, like very often in the area of development policy, are now higher on the agenda, and we are not really finishing our business in this area. And we have to really be very careful that this does not happen, because so far maybe 50% of people have access to treatment, but 50% don't have. So there's a lot to do, and the Millennium Goals 2015 is very close, and we have to be careful that this fight continues after 2015. Otherwise, it's no good investment.
So speaking of topics on the agenda, if you read about this topic in a newspaper, you most likely belong to the more mature segment of your country's population. In the US, for example, the average newspaper reader is now 55 years old. Younger people are increasingly turning to online sources to get their news, and changing habits are just one reason for a drop-off in print readership and revenues that is putting some of the industry's most reputable titles out of business.
They've long been read by both popes and common people alike. But will newspapers and magazines soon be consigned to the dustbin of history? The list of print media publications shutting up shop is growing. In Germany, the Financial Times Deutschland has thrown in the towel, and the traditional Frankfurter Rundschau recently also announced it was shutting its doors. And it isn't just happening in Germany. All over the world, prestigious magazines and newspapers are stopping the presses and switching to a purely web-based format. The death of print. Is it finally coming to pass?
Alexander Gerlach, if print is dying, whose or what is the murderer?
Well, there is no death of print as such. I mean, we have to see why is the newspaper, the daily newspaper, now at stake? Television was already quicker than the newspaper, and radio was too. There's two reasons why it is so that the daily newspaper is at stake. First of all, information is now all over the place. So when my father bought, let's say, the Süddeutsche Zeitung or the FAZ, it cost €2. He paid €1.50 for the information, for the gathering of the information. And remember, 10 years ago, you had to go to write an article, you had to go to an archive. I had to do that at German television when I did a TV piece. You had to go really literally downstairs and getting some tapes, and then it was not digitalized, so you had to watch every tape. So, and this is today all around us. So the information need people can satisfy by other means. And the other hand is social media. It's not that you need to know in the very instant something happens right away in real time, but people start talking about things that happen much quicker. And this happens on social media, and this is why you do not wait for the next day. So these two reasons have put the daily newspaper, the model of a daily newspaper, at its end.
Is it really the online sources, though, including new media, or is it also the fact that online sites have attracted away the companies that used to advertise with print newspapers? Oh, no, I think we see a constant shifting between ad revenues going to online and print. But it's not that nobody wants to advertise in a print magazine anymore. The European just launched a print edition, and it was really great ads. And the second issue coming out December 13th is also full of ads. So it's not. But one thing is, most of the publishing houses 10 years, 12 years ago, they invested a lot of money in their online sites, and they thought they will make the same revenues as they used to make with their print magazines, and this did not happen for several reasons. And so they still sit on an investment of 20 or 30 million, and it was never the money was never coming back again. And so they're all disappointed about what happened in the browser. So have they been too slow to develop new business models, or have the bosses simply been too impatient? Spiegel Online, after all, now one of Germany's most reputable online sites and always one of its most venerable print institutions, it took many, many years for that online site to actually make money.
There is within the publishing houses, I mean, you can't just say it per se, but there has been sort of what is this online thing? So you hear about Spiegel, they still are quarreling between online and print. On the other hand, Welt, Axel Springer, they just have now one pool of journalists, and they write for online or write for Die Welt, and there is like a print edition, and there's an online edition, and there's a tablet edition. So there is several states of how publishers in Germany have reacted to the challenges of digitalization.
Isn't the fact that online media hold a huge accuracy risk? Basically, people are putting all kinds of content out there on the web, but much of it unverified, unfiltered, unchecked.
What good journalism is about has not changed through the internet. So that also includes fact-checking, writing good text, basically, because you, as a journalist, you are trained how to make a good television piece or how you write. I mean, not every professor who is a good teacher at university is a good writer in journalistic terms. So everything that made good journalism is also online or on a tablet still good journalism. And
Except that today journalists are under enormous time pressure to deliver 24/7. That what's expected of them in terms of productivity has changed vastly, even in the time that you have been active in this area.
Yeah, but what can I say? I mean, there are several solutions to that. You hire more journalists, but since we have decreasing ad revenues, it's a difficult thing. But I think on the other hand, in every industry you are kind of in a bubble, and now we think, oh, now we have to be every day and every. Radio was always every day and every hour, and television also. So there is it hasn't everything changed in the last years.
Let me ask you this: Can you, as an editor at the European, pay people to do long-term, in-depth investigative research?
We are a debate magazine, so we focus completely on commentary, interdisciplinary commentary, and when we have a debate, everything can be debated, what is a topic in the society at this moment, and we gather the experts in the field to write an op-ed on that. So our model is not an investigative model. In fact, having the resources to put some people on, let's say, this or that case, we really need the money. And we have another business model, but we couldn't. I mean, it's definitely true. It costs you a lot, and Spiegel is doing a lot of this. And this is, I guess, is why it's still so successful, because people know, okay, if I read a piece in Spiegel, it's been written by 10 people. There have been a number of people checking the facts, and there's another number of people who had just gone through the text and corrected it if it's right spelled and all that stuff.
So let's do another informal poll now. Ask our other guests, who of you is still reading an actual newspaper? Thomas?
Yes, daily. And even at the weekend, I have a magazine which I'm reading.
Okay. Ilona?
2 even.
2 newspapers?
Yes.
Okay. You both belong to
generation.
to that little niche segment, or you're over 55, which I'm guessing is not the case.
No.
Let me ask you this. How have your reading habits changed over the last 5 to 10 years?
Well, not so much. I enjoy...
Not getting news from online sources?
Yes, of course. On my day-to-day business, of course, I'm asking people to do research or do it myself and have the information available which I need. But for my personal use, I really stay with a newspaper, enjoying it, to read it in a plane or in a train or Saturday morning at breakfast.
Ilona Auerfrege, you clearly belong to the younger cohort in society. How have your habits changed in the last 5 to 10 years? And could you imagine a day coming where you actually wouldn't really need that paper anymore?
Well, what I like about the newspaper, of course, my life has also changed, and I'm using the new media much more than we used to do that 10 years ago. But what I like about print newspaper is that I'm sometimes forced to read things that I wouldn't look for myself, because browsing the internet is often, you only get the information that you search yourself. But having a newspaper in your hand, you would stumble over some piece about a new art project or about plants in the new botanic garden. So it feeds me with information which I would not ever dream of knowing. And that's the big plus of print media for me.
And indeed, Alexander Gerlach, one of the risks that some experts see in the US in the research that they've done is that by shifting to more online media, many people wind up confirming their pre-existing prejudices. In other words, if I'm a left-leaning person, then I almost only read websites that give me a left-leaning interpretation and stories that fit that model. Could this actually be a risk for the kind of democratic citizenship values that many of our societies have been based on?
I mean, there's two aspects to it. Online, if I go to Google, and Google learns about what I'm searching for, and so when I search, I get more detailed information, which is more shaped according to my needs and my desires and all that. So you're right. I mean, I'm narrowing down kind of the stuff that gets presented by me. But on the other hand, it's a search engine, so it's made and designed not to show me everything, but the thing I specifically look for. And now the variety in political terms. The Frankfurter Rundschau was to a very extent held by...
One of the papers that just closed here in Germany.
So we saw that in the piece. And one of the shareholders is the Social Democratic Party. So so they had a left-leaning, and everybody knew it. So, and the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung is more conservative, and so is Die Welt, and the Süddeutsche is more left-liberal. So we had this. If I read the Frankfurter Rundschau, what do you expect what I get? I mean, I get a very specific leaning and a specific interpretation, or an angle by on which I view reality. So what you just referred to has been the same in, let's say, old media.
So you're saying things haven't changed that much in that area. Very briefly, if you would please, where do you think we're going to be in 20 years? Newspapers gone, reading tablets only?
Print will be around for a long time. Print magazines like the European or others are luxury goods. You just buy them as you would have bought books earlier. You do not want to have your information, but other stuff.
Okay, thank you very much. Afraid we have to leave it there. That rounds out the agenda this week. Don't forget, you can watch the show again online. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye.